Chapter 1, Section 1, Getting to Know Ourselves. Do you remember in the previous introduction chapter when we mentioned that human suffering is something that many billions of people face throughout our modern world today? But what is the root cause for most of our human suffering? It is the development of all of our individual and different I am ego emotions. But what are these ego emotions, and what are the scientific reasons that we all develop these ego emotions, including myself? And what is the reason that they cause most of our emotional suffering? And how do they develop to become all of our individual and different adult ego emotional behavioural patterns? We have all developed ego emotions, including myself, all different and in all different degrees of strength, some mild, some dominant, and some extreme. But it is these extreme ego-driven behavioural patterns that are currently leading us all to our own human downfall, as you are about to discover when we discuss two very important Earth-related chapters at the end of Section 1. But the I am ego emotions are responsible for all of our individual and different emotional suffering that begins to get activated and stored into our long-term memory, that begins in our very early childhood from all of our individual and different childhood emotional events, and continues to get activated throughout childhood and into adulthood, especially through all of our individual and different adult struggles and fighting to gain money for our survival. This is why we have all now become slaves to money. But it's not only money that develops our ego emotions. That is why we are going to dedicate a few very important chapters getting to know these reasons and how a few individuals' extreme ego-driven behavioural patterns have caused many of us to experience a great deal of hurt, fear, mistreatment and exploitation that begins to develop and store into our long-term memories our own individual and different ego, fear or hurt emotions. In other words, our own individual and different ego emotional wounds and suffering. That is why we are going to dedicate these next very long chapters to these very important reasons. Remember that we have all stored ego emotions into our main memory, every single one of us, including myself. But all of us have developed all different ego emotions and in all different degrees of strength. Some people have developed mild ego emotions, some dominant, and some people have developed some very extreme ego-driven emotions, as we already mentioned earlier. But don't worry, all scientific details concerning the reasons why and how we all began to develop all of our different ego emotions will be explained in much more detail throughout the first half of this book, Section 1. But to help guide us through all of these discussions regarding all of our different past and present emotional behavioural patterns, you will first find a very simplified diagram at the beginning of this book. And to complement all of these discussions, you will also discover all important scientific information will hold an asterisk that will be connected to all further readings throughout each chapter, found in a very big index at the back of this book, so that you can make your own research in your own time and at your own leisure. The aim of this very big book is for us all to find practical solutions to be released and healed from all of these ego emotional wounds and suffering. And this is why many of these short and long-term solutions that we are going to discuss in the second half of this book, Section 2, lie in this very urgent need for us all to begin to adapt to some brand new altruistic we are emotions and behaviours of the collective consciousness. And that is why adaptation is going to be mentioned quite a bit throughout this book. But it's very important for us to recognise that it is these extreme ego-driven individuals that are now leading us all to our own human downfall, because we now have far too many extreme ego greed for money behaviours, whose main concern is simply to make financial profits, with no concerns for the protection of all vulnerable people and no concerns for the protection of all vulnerable that belongs to all Earth's nature, including our home, our fragile planet Earth. For example, below you will discover 2 of the most urgent short-term solutions to combat global warming. The rest will be discussed throughout 2 very long and very urgent Earth-related chapters at the end of section 1. Trees can save all of our lives. Wood consumption means that thousands of hectares of trees on our lands, in our forests and rainforests, are cut down each year and not replaced, used for the production of all paper product manufacturing, toilet paper product manufacturing, cardboard consumer product packaging manufacturing, wood manufacturing, and all wood for biomass machines, not to mention the destruction of thousands of hectares of trees in our forests, cut down, for instance, for all mining industries, mining for our dwindling rare earth resources, and that includes also fracking practices used to discover new sources of methane gas, is exposing one of the most deadliest greenhouse gases to enter into our Earth's atmospheric ozone and contributing greatly to all of these global warming and climate change issues, all developed by a few individuals' extreme ego greed behaviours simply to make financial profits. And all of the destruction of thousands of hectares of trees on our lands, in our forests and rainforests, to make way for thousands of hectares of new, intensive agricultural farming practices. Even forest fires created through global warming is contributing to the destruction of trillions of trees on our woods, lands, forests and rainforests. But we are not replanting anywhere near enough trees to get us out of this global disaster. Because if we have no trees, we have no mycorrhiza that attaches themselves to the roots of trees that can absorb all of the current huge amounts of carbon dioxide and toxic greenhouse gases before they enter into our Earth's atmospheric ozone layer, and before this ozone layer allows even further ultraviolet radiation to enter into our Earth's atmosphere and to heat up our Earth. This is global warming. And if we have no trees, we cannot convert carbon dioxide through a process called photosynthesis to create all of our oxygen that we all breathe each day. So how can safe, healthy, organic grown crops and foods save all of our lives? Most of us are currently unaware that billions of hectares of our current intensive, sprayed, toxic, pesticide and insecticide agricultural crops and foods are destroying our own health, including the fertility of our world's agricultural soils. Through systemic spraying of crops and agricultural soils, causing a complete depletion of all of the good living microorganisms in the soils, and that are vitally needed to retain all of the good health, nutrients and fertility in the soils. For instance, the destruction of all the good protozoa, good nematodes, good bacterias, good mycorrhiza, good fungi, good earthworms, but without these beneficial microorganisms, we cause a complete breakdown of the soil structure, and in some cases, even desertification, an irreparable breakdown of the fertile soil structure. In other words, the inability to grow anything in an agricultural soil ever again. If we have no fertile agricultural soils, we have no food to eat. Not to mention, all intensive insecticide and pesticide sprayed agricultural farming practices are causing death to our world's bee populations. But bees are our main pollinators that pollinate most of our world's edible flowering crops and foods. If we have no bee populations, again, we have no food to eat. This is the reason that all corporate agrochemical companies, whose main concern is simply extreme ego greed behaviours to gain financial profits, have now become a major contribution for us all heading towards our own human downfall, that have persuaded 90% of our world's farmers to switch to intensive agricultural farming and growing practices, by encouraging all of our farmers to buy gallons of toxic chemical pesticides and insecticides to be sprayed onto our world's agricultural intensive grown crops and foods, with the incentives that all of our intensive farmers will produce less insect pest waste on their crops and foods, and therefore higher crop yields, because the incentives to the farmers are less food waste means more money in the farmers' pockets. That is the reason that we have all now become slaves to money. Planting trees and organic farming practices are two of the most urgent short-term solutions to protect us all. But because there are far too many very serious earth-related issues to discuss in this very small chapter, you will need to wait until we spend a couple of very important chapters getting to know our earth at the very end of section 1. However, all extreme ego greed for money behaviours are now leading us all to our own human downfall. So how do our ego emotions begin to develop and become stored into our main memory throughout our very early childhoods? And how is it that all that we become is our memories? These are going to be the very important discussions throughout these next few chapters. Remember that nearly 90% of our human suffering has developed through our ego emotions. However, physical mental health issues are not going to be discussed throughout this book, because all persons suffering with physical mental health issues, such as dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., must continue to receive medical help from their medical doctors. Please remember also that none of this book can possibly be understood without reading or listening to all 13 chapters. This is because all 13 chapters are interconnected with all other chapters.